here at Framingham State University. And our mission, as you can see on the screen here, is to provide information for educators and families. We're supporting their efforts to provide the best possible education and support to their students and children who have disabilities, as well as students who are gifted and advanced learners, and other students who have unmet needs. So today, this is our second major lecture and event presentation of the semester. Earlier in February, we had Dr. Nadine Gabb give a presentation about dyslexia, and you can view that recording on our website. Also, after this event, you will be able to view the recording, and Dr. Stewart has been kind enough to share her slides. So those will come to you in an email, and they will be on our website afterwards. So these are the types of events that we hold. This is our first semester of operation, and little did we know what would occur with sort of the current crisis we're in, but we're so thankful that Dr. Stewart was still willing to give this presentation remotely from home. We were already planning to offer a hybrid format with an in-person or a webinar feature. So obviously we're fully online, and we're offering other online events such as small group discussions for parents and caregivers. So we've had 2 of those so far, facilitated by 2 facilitators, a parent as well as a staff member from the Chris Walsh Center. So our third of those discussions will actually be a follow-up to this event, and it's taking place 1 week from today at 7 p.m. next Wednesday. So if there's a few parents or caregivers out there who would like to register, we do have a few more spots available, and we will put a link in the chat to register for that too on our Eventbrite, that's where you can find that. So I'll segue to the next slide with that, so you can see our website and contact information. You'll see our events also on social media, so you can take a look at our Facebook or Instagram. We welcome comments and questions, as we're a brand new center and we're getting started. So that's my introduction to the center, and now I'd like to get started. I do see a few people are using the hand raise feature, and so you are welcome to put out any questions in the chat for us. And the folks who are helping me out with moderating this and moderating the chat and helping you out are the psychology intern for the Chris Walsh Center, Hannah Rickey, and the center assistant, Leah Beausoleil. So if you 2 are here, you can turn on your microphone and camera and say hello. I think we've got them kind of at the ready, and I am going to.
Hi guys.
Okay, good. Is that Hannah and Leah? Good. So they'll be in the chat helping to answer questions and sharing some links as well. The links that are in Dr. Stewart's slides, they'll be putting in the chat for you, so you can click on them as we go. And they'll be collecting your questions to have Dr. Stewart answer at the end of this session during the Q&A time. All right, so without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Leah, who will introduce our presenter today.
Hello everyone. So Dr. MaryGrace Stewart is president of Massachusetts Association for Gifted Education. Dr. Stewart has been active in talent development for over 30 years, primarily in New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, and has been instrumental in various regional, national, and international initiatives. She has taught pre-K to grade 12 and has done numerous presentations to educators and parents on topics related to general and gifted education. She holds a bachelor's and 3 graduate degrees in education, and being twice exceptional herself, she has a special interest in this population and how to best educate and support them in school and at home. And now please welcome Dr. MaryGrace Stewart.
Hello, everyone. I'm tickled pink that you're here. 94 attendees so far, which is wonderful. I'm going to go through these slides, but I'm not necessarily going to read them to you. So hopefully will get more out of this than just you reading the slides. Can a person have a disability and be very bright, gifted, talented, or highly able? That's a question that comes up a lot. And in one of the myths of gifted education is that they can't be, that that's not possible. However, it is very possible, and it's called twice exceptional. And in our profession, we tend to refer to it as 2E. First, I'm going to try to define some terms. I think my ninth grade math teacher told me that was important. Special needs and advanced, bright, highly able, or gifted overlap to form twice exceptional. In other words, it's a person that has both an exceptional ability and is in some way, shape, or form considered an individual with disabilities under the Individuals with Disability Act. In my case, it's dyslexia, and my strength area is creativity. The difficulty comes when we don't know clearly what is gifted in the first place. And so we may not notice it. We may notice special need because we are geared up to do that, and the federal law says we have to. And one of the difficulties about the definition of gifted is that it's kind of like the definition of art. Everybody kind of thinks they know what it is, but nobody seems to be able to exactly pin it down. So we have a lot of different possibilities here, from A to Z. There are some commonalities, though, in all of the definitions. The person who is gifted is an advanced outlier. They have an exceptional ability. They're usually very creative or out of the box. They tend to be very intense individuals, and they tend to have a leadership quality, which often manifests itself as a child as what you might consider an alpha child. And that can pose some challenges for parents and for teachers. The other piece that's very common in the description of giftedness is asynchronous development. So there's extreme differences between their cognitive and often their chronological development. There's also something called overexcitabilities, intensities, sensitivities. The term overexcitabilities was translated from, I believe, the Polish, and it's not exactly a word that we use every day, but in general, if you imagine that the brain is very highly tuned, then other stimuli, whether they be emotional, psychological, or physical, can be more extreme for those individuals. For example, I know of a boy who, when he drove past a certain mall that had a, I believe it was a microwave type of security system, he felt like his ears were being stabbed by pins because he could hear that high-pitched sound. And he also could hear a dog whistle. The federal definition is probably one that is the most readily adopted, but one of the problems with it is that it says those who give evidence. Well, oftentimes the giftedness can be kind of like a seed under a rock or in a barren land where there isn't sufficient nourishment, and therefore it doesn't give evidence, but it's still there. The asynchronous development looks a lot like this green zigzag line here. And it can be very problematic because those high sensitivities can seem like the child's behavior seems immature, where in fact they're just reacting to the heightened awareness that they have. Sometimes parents will say something like, "My kid won't wear jeans. I don't understand." They say they're very rough. Well, hey, I turn my socks inside out because the interior of a socks are too rough. It's not that there's anything less developed or less competent with them. It's just that they are more highly aware. You'll often see these things manifest in extremes. these are 3 pictures that I see all the time. If they're if they're happy, they're very, very happy. If they're angry, they're very, very angry. If they're sad, they're very, very sad. And this is not every single gifted person. Obviously, I'm going to be making some pretty extreme generalizations here, but this is what parents and class situations are dealing with. And if you have a child who's in your class who all of a sudden starts screaming, that's problematic. But it's not necessarily anything out of the norm, shall we say, for a child who's highly aware. So how can you tell if a child is probably going to be gifted? Well, it could be something like an IQ score. It could be student work samples. It could be that they have a lot of characteristics that are common to gifted individuals, which I'll show you the list in a second. It's not necessarily the kid who gets all A's, although it could be. And it's not necessarily the child or the student who has the highest level of state standardized test scores. But as a preponderance of those things, you can sort of tell. And also, if any one of those things is really spiked, then it merits further investigation. If you see this, some above average ability, some creativity, some task commitment, when it's brought to bear on an area of the student's interest, then chances are that child is gifted. In certain people, at certain times, under certain circumstances, is the caveat. Here's the list of common characteristics, and as you know, these slides will be available. These were developed by James Webb and other colleagues of his, and there's a lot of them. But if you see several of these kinds of things in a student in your classroom or in your home, you have to ask yourself, And the reason why this matters is because they have a different cognitive nourishment need than most kids. Now, the other thing we need to sort of define is who are the people with special needs? Well, special needs is pretty clearly defined. IDEA, Individuals with Disability Act, Disabilities Education Act, for me, lists these things. But within these, there are several others, especially in the category of other physical or mental health impairment, specific learning disability. Those are big categories. Intellectual disability, that's a huge category. So if they've got multiple disabilities, this looks like a short list, but it's really much, much longer. The special needs has a federal requirement, and they have principles. And we might say that these principles are true for all children, but there was a time when students were excluded from public education because of their special needs. And this sets up a structure by which that's no longer allowed. You may have heard of the IEP or the 504, and these are very unofficial definitions. But basically, they're both plans for students with disabilities to get them help. The IEP can be a rather complex process. The 504 is generally considered a less complicated process. But in both cases, they're about tweaking or significantly modifying the way a student has the educational process presented to them. And in this case, sometimes you can also have the giftedness be a part of these plans. And we're going to talk a lot about that. There's a thing called FAPE, which if you're in the special needs world, I'm sure you know well. Free and appropriate public education. And people say, well, everybody should have a free and appropriate public education. Yes, but it's like saying everybody should have an education that meets their needs. Well, yes. In this case, FAPE is a particular term that's used by the special education profession that is targeted specifically at children who are under IDEA. There's also a phrase called least restrictive environment, and you say, well, nobody should have a restricted environment in their education. True, but this is a term that is used specifically in special education to explain why you shouldn't have a child, for example, back when I was a little kid, if you were blind, you went to a special school, a separate school. And that's not okay necessarily anymore. So we try to have it be the least restrictive, and we try to have them included in the regular classroom as much as possible, because they're a member of society and they have the same rights as the rest of us. So, who is twice exceptional? Well, it's anyone with one or more kind of giftedness or talent area, and it can be in anything, and one or more kind of special need. And it makes for a very complex neuroatypical structure, system. If you take anything from the left column with anything from the right column, you end up with 2E. Here's some people that you may or may not know are twice exceptional. Whoopi Goldberg makes no bones about it. But the story of Walt Disney I find fascinating myself. George Patton, really? You know, Harry Truman? Yep. The neuroscience in twice exceptionality is just coming to the fore because we now have the technology to be able to see how neurons are firing and where they're going and how they're going. And these kids have an atypical system in their mind, and we need to be aware of that, because the normal things that we're used to as creating certain pathways may or may not go that direction and may or may not come to that conclusion. The one that I find particularly interesting is the one that says greater sensory sensitivity. We always kind of saw that, but we didn't really like, yeah, you know, he's kind of hyper about, you know, touching and being touched. And well, there's a good reason for why that is. It's actually a physical phenomenon in the brain. So you can imagine that this sets up some situations and conflict and challenges, because the strengths and their challenges kind of collide oftentimes. And another thing that happens is that they often can compensate. So someone such as myself, I was a B student all the way through school, and nobody knew that I had a reading difficulty because I found creative ways to work around it. I just thought, you know, you had to find a way to read, so I was going to find a way. And I felt like I was cheating because I got shortened versions of books. I got books on records, big records, and played them on my hi-fi. Some of you will know those things. Anyway, they also tend to be seen as special needs students and retained in special ed because they're not making too much progress. Now, the difficulty is the reason why they're not making too much progress. It also tends to cause poor self-esteem and a lack of self-confidence. And there's also an executive functioning issue. So you may say, well, this kid is so disorganized, there's just nothing we can do. No, it's a common trait, and there is definitely something you can do. However, When you see something that has webbed feet and lays eggs and has a bill and has very cute young, you say, oh, it's a duck. But you know what? It might be a platypus. And the reason why I give you that analogy is that there are a lot of characteristics about gifted and twice exceptional people that makes them seem like they're special needs kids. And yet they may not be. So this is a very careful thing when we see a child who has a lot of strengths or a student who has a lot of strengths and yet they have special needs. Don't assume that they're a special needs student first. They may have a high level of sophisticated understanding of content, but they can't read. They might be very, very creative, but they can't make their hand do what it needs to do on the paper. They might be deeply in concentration, and you can't get them out of it. And you think, oh gosh, he's daydreaming all the time. It may be actually that he's solving some problem in his mind, not necessarily that he's off daydreaming. There's a potential for great expertise, but he may have difficulty with the novice level because of not being able to get those things to happen automatically. They may have social awareness or not. So there's a conundrum, and this is put by Seth Perler and others, but if you Google Seth Perler, I think you'll find a lot of interesting information. The thing is, and this is kind of what happened to me, is when giftedness is identified and learning differences are not, adults tend to blame the child or the student. I used to hear, why didn't you get an A? What's the matter with you? You didn't work hard enough. I worked very, very hard. The other way, too, if the disability is identified, you may not notice the strength area, and therefore you may not be able to engage the student because you're not really at their readiness level. And when kids are unidentified, then they're often misunderstood. And one professor at the National Association for Gifted Children National Conference last November stated that these were the most misunderstood kids in our public schools. So what we do about it is not just fixing what's broken, but nurturing what's best. This is Csikszentmihalyi. If you've never heard of him before, don't try to spell it. But the gist of it is that twice exceptional kids fairly easily get into what's called flow. And they're fairly easily aroused, and they need a sense of control. So where they need to be is in those yellow places that are on that diagram. And the challenge level goes up and the skill level goes over. That's what makes it work. Here's the essential concept. If you walk away with nothing else today, remember this. These are gifted and talented children and teens with some learning challenges. They are not special needs children and teens with a few strengths. That may seem like I'm splitting hairs and it's semantics, but it's not. If the student is got their gift and talented and readiness addressed, and then they recognize that they need some help, it turns out much more successful than if you try to say, well, you've got this deficit and we need to fix that before we can let you move on. So we're going to talk about educating twice exceptional students, and I hope parents will bear with us. And then we're going to flip to the parent point of view. There are some principles here. Number one, be flexible. Number two, get out of their way. take the lid off. It's often said that we as educators need to be a guide on the side or a facilitator. I like to think of it like being a good resource librarian, more than being a lecturer. We need to have something meaningful for these kids to do while they're waiting. And we need to work with parents. And parents need to work with teachers. We need to be on the same side of the table. When we're on opposite sides, it doesn't work. Some educators may know the idea of the zone of proximal development. That's what I call the Goldilocks Theory. It's where students are working in their level of readiness that is a little bit challenging, but not so challenging that it's frustrating or impossible. And it's not so simple that they could do it quite easily and without taking much time or thought. One of the reasons for this is if it's too hard or too easy, the mind does not engage. So if you want to engage these students, you need to find that sweet spot. Also, you need to function or have them function in the manner of the professionals. I understand that that may not be totally possible for all students, but students who are highly able in something, even if they struggle in something else, need to be speaking in terms of the language of the discipline, for example. If a child can say Tyrannosaurus Rex, they can say most professional terminology. And if you give them the professional terminology first, that's what they'll remember. If you give them a simpler term, for example, if you say big scary dinosaur that eats meat, they'll remember big scary dinosaur that eats meat. We need to engage students by leveraging their strengths, allowing various ways for them to show what they know. Just yesterday, I was talking to a gifted education teacher, and she was saying how this twice exceptional kid she had bowed out of the program because of the stress of all the things that are going on now, but also because he didn't want to do an essay. Well, essay was not his means of expression. And that was the assignment that she had given them, was to write a reflective essay on some things that had been going on in their project, not in life. And he dropped out. So you need to think about the idea of assessment being a little different in the sense that you're thinking of how can they show what they know rather than how well can they do an essay. If they need to learn the structure of an essay, they can express themselves in another way and then work backwards from that to glean the contents of an essay and to learn the skeleton of that essay and how to apply those pieces of information onto that skeleton. So the term compacting the curriculum may be known to some of you, and it's a whole book unto itself. So the idea that I could explain compacting the curriculum in this session is probably not true, but in general, I tell teachers that it's kind of like when you have a student who's absent for 3 or 4 days, and then they come back. Do you make them do everything that they missed while they were gone if they were sick? Probably not. Probably you're going to have some essential concepts that you want them to learn, and you're going to probably give them like the most difficult of the problems or the situation and see how they do. And if they do really well, you let them move on. Well, that's the same thing. So this is what you're doing. You're hybridizing the required content, their strength area, their creativity, and then you're undergirding that with support. So an interest plus the requirement, a strength area plus your requirement, a creativity plus your requirement, and that support will get you a more optimal result and more optimal learning for the student. Once again, you want to leverage their strengths for their skill development, and then they can really soar. It's also important to provide a place to create that has raw materials. I know that high school teachers don't always have their own classrooms, but if you share a classroom with a couple of other teachers, you can all build a bunch of stuff in a corner of the room or in a closet or something nearby that has a lot of resources in it. And it should not be any kind of a kit or any kind of a predetermined thing. It's raw materials. And the reason why you need that is if you're going to give students options for how to show what they know, they're going to need stuff with which to do that, whether that be wires or batteries or masking tape or balloons or whatever it is. As you can see at the top here, that sculpture of the head is made out of a Tide jug. So here's some essential strategies, and we're going to talk about these individually per slide. Differentiation as per Carol Ann Tomlinson. And a lot of people say that differentiation is not possible. Well, if that's what they're saying, I don't mean to be unkind, but that's not true. If you learn the systems of classroom management as per Carol, it works all the way up through high school. You need to pay attention to the proximal development. There needs to be options for acceleration. There needs to be an increase in the depth and complexity. You can also do some of these some of the time and others of these other times. Independent investigation of real-world problems and scaffolding. These things need to be working in concert, the scaffolding with the other options. If ever you have seen a real-world problem-solving project, this was it. The first time I found out about this group, I heard what I thought was Yo-Yo Ma playing the cello, when in fact it was a young man playing an oil drum. They wanted to play music. They found raw materials. They made it work. This is the increasing depth and complexity part. If you've never heard of Dr. Sandra Kaplan, this is her. And she's out of the University of Southern California. And the idea is to hybridize whatever is required with one or more of these things. The language of the discipline, greater detail, looking for patterns, trends. So even if the student has not finished the regular assignment, if you know that they've not finished that because they think it's kind of dumb, then you might risk letting them go deeper or more complex first, and then working your way backwards to the more basic. I know that sounds inside out, but I've had a lot of experience with this, and it does seem to work. A lot of people say, oh, we can't accelerate kids because grade skipping is bad for them. It's socially and emotionally a bad idea. I got news for you. That's a myth. In fact, thousands of students over more than 20 years have been studied by the University of Iowa Acceleration Institute. And the finding is that it's the opposite. Kids who need more challenge, greater challenge, more advanced challenge, it's like kids having big feet. If you try to put them in the average size shoe, it's going to hurt, and they're going to rebel. They're going to either withdraw or act out or check out. Acceleration doesn't have to be by year either. It can be by topic, by unit, by chapter, by marking period, by semester, or by year. The gist of it is to find out what they already know, and then don't make them do that anymore. I know that may seem kind of silly, but we do it a lot. We often figure, well, this is a fifth grade student, and they're getting A's, and they have achieved the fifth grade stuff. Therefore, my job is done. And that's often the way we're evaluated. how well the child accessed the regular curriculum. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, they're waiting. And how many of us would wait for 6 hours a day for something interesting to happen at their jobs? So, educators, please learn more about giftedness, and please learn about the special needs of the students that you work with. Put the first things first. They are gifted students who need scaffolding. And please remember the platypus. Don't assume that because you see certain behavioral characteristics that you're seeing a special needs student. Use a strength-based pedagogy. Parents, well, it isn't easy. I'm sure my parents had a hard time, and I've had one myself. It's our job to accept and affirm these kids. It's our job to support and encourage them. It's our job to provide opportunities for self-understanding and self-advocacy. There's actually a book by Deb Douglas that's called Advocating for Yourself. Fiddlesticks, I don't have it handy here. I thought I did. Yes. The Power of Self-Advocacy for Gifted Learners. Now you may say, well, but my child is a special needs child. If your child is also a gifted child, please think of them as a gifted child who has needs for support. Just because a person only has like one foot that works well, it doesn't mean they can't walk. It doesn't mean you totally focus on the other foot. Strength and interest-based activities. There's a phrase, follow your bliss. And I often say to parents, follow their bliss. I know that can change from hour to hour and day to day with some kids. And with some kids, it's the same from the time they're 3 years old until they graduate grad school and maybe beyond. But if you do that, things are a little bit more smooth in life, which is not to say that you don't set limits. But for example, you can give them maybe 3 choices that you've already approved, but because they have some choice, it'll go better. And the older they are, the more choices you can provide. So if it's movie night and you've got 10 different movies that you're okay with, then those are the ones say, here's some movies. Which one do you want? And then they have agency and some control, and that's huge for these guys. There's a lot you can do too that does not cost money. Museums, libraries, websites, parks, park and rec department. By the way, with the park and rec department, you might not want to tell them how old the child really is, or even with online courses. If they don't ask and it's a good fit for your child, just go ahead. Once the child fits in, if they find out later, they might be a little annoyed, but the child will already be a part of the situation and they'll have to admit that they do fit. We want to try to listen without judging. An awful lot of times, these guys just need to vent. It's kind of like having an upset stomach and being sick. They don't want you to fix it necessarily. They just need a safe place to blow that off. And you need to ask them if they want something from you. So we and they say, well, do you want me to try to help you fix this? And most of the time, they'll say, no. I just so angry about this. Okay. So choice, responsibility, and limits. The simplicity of no. These guys are great at working around us. And if you give them even a word after the word no, they'll hook into it and be able to kind of twist the situation around. Good example. my second child, is like maybe 6 or 7, I think 6 years old. And I say to her, honey, it's time to go to bed. And she looks up at the clock and she goes, no, mommy, it's not. I have 37 seconds yet before it hits 8 o'clock. I'm like, okay, she's right. I'm going to wait 37 seconds. And when the second hand gets to the top, then I'm going to say, it's time to go to bed. And luckily, in that particular case, she said yes, and went willingly. So you want to also pick your battles. Don't argue over 37 seconds. Coping with perfectionism. These guys tend to think black and white, and it's very important that they learn about shades of gray. So if you look into the information about growth mindset, that's now the term that Carolyn Dweck coined. So if you look up what's growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and you help them see the shades of gray, and first you can just help them see the white instead of the black. And you can do that by just looking at things like the vase face, image that can either look like a vase or look like a face, just so that they can see that situations have two sides. It's not all black, but you know what? It's not all white either. I have another thing that I call stealth parenting, which is kind of a misnomer, but the idea is to narrow the choices, like I mentioned with the movies. And then there's this phenomenon that magicians use. If you cover something with a black cloth, people tend to get curious about what's underneath it. So if there's something you need for them to do or attend to, and they're not doing it, if you can throw a black cloth over it, like it's a homework paper or a book or a movie, whatever the object is, and when they say, what's that? You say, oh, it's nothing, never mind, and leave the room. I can almost guarantee you they will look underneath and peruse what that is. Another way you can say it is, oh, that's not yours. You know, that's your brother's, or that's your dad's, or that's the dog's, who, you know, anybody other than them, and they'll still be curious. Another thing that you can do is eavesdropping, and this is kind of controversial, but if you have forced air heat and the kids are playing in the basement, chances are you can hear them pretty well if you're in the room above that. And I know that that sounds creepy, but if you don't intrude on their space, and yet you do things that make sure they're safe, it tends to lessen the clash of personalities. Because remember, you are the alpha, but they're becoming an alpha. And like with lions, particularly, you know, middle school age and up, they're going to start to push. And so the amount of times that you need to push back, if you can diminish those, it seems to be helpful. You want to have a welcoming environment for their friends. So I never, ever had Oreos or potato chips or soda in the house until my kids got to be teenagers, when I wanted them to be here and in my basement, not in somebody else's basement. And that's one way to do it. If you're the one that has a welcoming environment and you're, you know, eavesdropping to make sure that they're safe, they feel comfortable. And, you know, there were times when my children's friends came here when they were in trouble. And that's why. There should also be a place in your house that has raw materials, recycled materials, no specific directions or kits. And everybody that does Legos goes, what? Okay, so they love Legos and they do the kit. Then what? You spend $150 on this kit. It's done. Now what? Well, the now what is you take it apart and mix up all the kits together and then let them really learn. Let them really create with those Legos. Thinking toys and games when you're going to be buying, you know, Christmas presents or birthday presents or Hanukkah presents. Anytime you're doing gifts, you can have that in the back of your mind. Something that's, you know, there's a lot of them that have been around for a long time. Battleship, chess, good heavens, how long has chess been around? You know, go to the Goodwill store and get some wacky clothes, prom dresses and stuff, furry material from blankets, and just throw it in a box. Let them figure it out. There's a whole list there, and I'm sure that there's more. One of the toys that I got for my kids secondhand when they were about 4 years old was an old marble run, a plastic marble run. To this day, and the kids are now in their late 20s and 30s, that is still the thing that they love to use. Be aware about the law for their special needs. Oftentimes, we educators can be a little kind of pompous. I know I'm guilty of it myself. And we think we're in control and we think we know best. But as parents, we need to know where do we really stand? What are the rules? And then work side by side to help the school implement it. When we point fingers, it doesn't work. We need to partner with the school. We need to stay on the same side. They're kind of like general practitioners. And what we really need is often like a kidney surgeon or a brain surgeon. But the kidney surgeon and the brain surgeon aren't there. So we all need to work together to make something happen. There are resources in the school. There are more advanced classes. There are libraries. There are computers. There's tons of opportunities as long as the school can help you and you can help them. So I suggest you invest in your school before you ask for anything. It's that pay it forward kind of thing. One of my last schools that I worked in, there was a lady who was Lebanese, and she made an incredible chicken and rice dish. And she would bring it and put it in the faculty room and say nothing. Another parent would bring banana bread that had chocolate chips in it. Another parent left off Reese's peanut butter cups. All the stuff that we shouldn't have, potato chips. And when something like that would arrive, the teachers who had their classrooms near the faculty lunchroom would put out a in-house email. And all of a sudden, you know, anybody that could would come flock to the cafeteria and get some of that stuff, because God knew if you waited till lunchtime, it'd be gone. So the point is that the lady who brought the chicken dish, she did a lot of that kind of stuff. She would leave off boxes of tissues at the door and not say anything about who it was. She never once said anything about who it was. And yet, we all knew. And I'll tell you something, we would do anything for that woman. When you want something, don't demand. Ask a question. What if? In what ways might we? Could we please? Is it possible that? Do you have not, you better do your job, you're supposed to be doing this, this is what you're supposed to do, don't tell me that you can't do this? That will get you nowhere. So our goals, and the key to this, is once again using their strengths to support their challenges and to keep things interesting. We are advocates, not adversaries. We have to recognize both their strengths and their challenges, but we need to attend to their gift or their strength area or their interests first. There are ways that you can do this. One of the cool ways to do it is to explore things that are weird, wacky, wonderful. The picture in the lower right-hand corner here is actually a house made out of paper. Back in the Depression, and this is in it's eastern part of Massachusetts, but I can't remember the town. Anyway, during the Depression, this guy did not have a home. He started, I don't know where he got the shellac or varnish or whatever, but he just started saving the newspapers, and he dipped them in shellac or varnish or whatever it was, rolled them up, and made logs out of them. And then the logs were, some were small, some were fat, and he built the house. And once he built the house, he also built the chest around the grandfather clock. And he also, that piano there, that is built, the structure of it is built out of these paper logs. If you Google paper house, Massachusetts, you'll find it. There are places to go, things to do, people to meet. You can Google a professor online. I found a guy in Lebanon for a child who was interested in something called Baalbek. Baalbek is the Lebanese equivalent of the Acropolis in Greece. And in fact, it's actually more complex. We can get them advanced training in their interest area. After school, weekends, school vacations, you name it, it's out there. And some of it's free and some of it's not. But it can all be a match to their interests and strengths. You too, provide a corner. No kids. Find out more about your child's special need. There are associations for every single special need that there is. And those associations and support systems will help empower you. So, you are a guide on the side. You are not the sage on the stage. You're their scheduler, their taxi, their gatherer of choices, their supporter, affirmer, listener, and advocate. And beyond all else, you love them. Here are some suggested resources. This book here, To Be Gifted and Learning Disabled, was my first awakening. This is 3 or 4 editions after the one that I got, but it was huge for me. I have websites here, schools. One of the things that I tell people is if you don't quite get this, go to Bridges Academy. It's in California. You go online and just look through their website, and I think it will more and more and more become clear. There are organizations. For example, National Association for Gifted Education. That's my organization's mothership. Has a division for Twice Exceptional. There's Aegis, which is an organization that's devoted specifically to 2E kids. There are newsletters and Facebook pages, and I want to give special thanks and acknowledgement to these 3 women who were huge in my life. Dr. Susan Baum is the person in the red, Dr. Robin Shader is the lady in the middle, and Dr. Sally Reese. These are people that have given and devoted much of their lives to 2E kids. And thank you for being here. If it's useful, there's a little plug, a little commercial here. Membership in MAGE for the gifted ed part is not expensive, and there's a lot of benefit. And we are in close touch with each other, particularly in these days when you might not think that that would be possible because we're all across the state. But ironically, we're actually more close now than we ever have been before. For example, on Thursday evenings at 7 o'clock, we have like an open Zoominar. And so, you know, parents, educators, anybody that wants to just literally drop in, we're there. We're just answering questions, hanging out, helping each other. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. That was fantastic, and we have a lot of questions in the chat, as well as a lot of great comments and people giving one another suggestions. So I am going to ask Hannah and Leah to come back on and pick out a few of the questions to read. I think we could take about 5 minutes. I'm going to put the slides down so that we can see one another.
Cool. Can you
So
throw
take
me
it,
in there?
Yep.
Am I in there?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, take it away, Hannah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mary Grace. So one question a participant, Laura, had asked is there any tool to help us teachers to scaffolding, like a template or Canvas?
One size does not fit all. There are many, many different kinds of special needs. And so probably the best way to handle that would be to ask your special needs teacher for what kinds of scaffolding would be appropriate for that particular student. And also, it may be in their IEP or 504. Sometimes classroom teachers, for whatever reason, aren't necessarily aware of what kinds of support systems are out there and ready for them. But just ask. So no, there isn't one template. Sorry.
Thank you.
Next question.
All right, so Leah asked, how can I motivate my 13-year-old to do her online work?
You want the answer from the heart or the company line? How about if I give you both? The company line is, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. In other words, get it over with, get it out of your way, okay, so that you can get on to other stuff. From my heart, skip it. Don't do it. Because at 13, it's a battle of the wills, and the time would probably be better spent doing something that is, mentally enriching and challenging. But if the material is not, then it's like trying to put the kid's big foot into a little shoe. It hurts. And, doctor, it hurts when I do that. Well, don't do that. Next question.
So let's see. We have a question from guest 77. Can anyone located in Massachusetts recommend a math tutor for a dyslexic child gifted in math?
If it was me, well, can I defer that one to James, to Dr. Cressy?
Sure. So I'll just say briefly that one of the things the Chris Walsh Center plans to do going forward is to build up our website possibly with information like that. So we don't have anything right at the ready to go. But if you just sort of keep an eye on our website and our social media, then we can help out. You're always welcome to contact us directly.
And I would add to that, go to the state affiliate of the association for that particular special need. And because like when people come to us, we dig up people for them.
Yeah.
And if we don't know, then we ask until we can find out, and then we get back to the person. Yeah. So if it's dyslexia, I would go, in that direction. If it's ADHD, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I should also plug Framingham State University's amazing students that we have, since I'm a professor there, and we have students who are majoring in math and education who are often looking for those types of opportunities too. So you could reach out to me.
If the child is a teenager in particular, it seems to be very helpful if the tutor is like not too much older than them, like a college student is often very good fit.
All right, guest 77 also asked, can you explain further about the correlation between increased sensitivity and giftedness?
Well, what I would recommend to get a lot of information about that is go to a website that is SENG, and SENG is SENG, and then IFTED, senggifted.org, and type into their search box intensity or sensitivity or overexcitability, and you'll hit an enormous amount of information about that. But the gist of it is that when you realize the heightened awareness of everything, I call it sometimes like a Ferrari brain. It's very sensitive, it's very delicate, it tends to run at very high RPMs, and it needs to run fast, otherwise it kind of bogs down. And so the Ferrari brain is very tuned in to every little bump in the road. And so these fall into many different categories. There's like 6 different categories. Some of them are physical, some are emotional, some are psychological. And I would just say that, you know, the best thing to do probably is to go to the SENG website and find out more about that, because it's a little bit complicated, but in a practical sense, if you see somebody seemingly overreacting to something, and you know that they're very bright, you can probably say, well, you know, their world needs to be a little bit cautious. But if you can find out what their oversensitivity is, for example, the boy that had hyperhearing, I also know of a little girl who had hypersight, then you can modify their environment. One of the things we find a lot of problems in school is fluorescent lighting. There's a sound that fluorescent lights make that most people either don't hear or it doesn't bother them. But for some of these students, it is very painful. And so you have to find another way, because you're in essence like sticking them with pins, because that's the sensation that they describe when they experience that.
I think we'll take one last question.
So our one participant, Laura, had asked, how can we differentiate between ADHD and OE? MaryGrace, correct me if I'm wrong, but the acronym stands for overexcitability.
Yes.
We always thought our son's difficulties came from their overexcitability, but ADHD runs in our veins, and the little one just got diagnosed. We have been recommended to try meds, and they're actually working.
There's a very fine line that I believe tends to sort of wobble back and forth from the OE and the ADHD. And there's a book called Misdiagnosis of Gifted Children. And it's because of that very fine line. So in general, do we really need to know what label the situation has? Or is what we really need to do whatever we can as parents and as educators to help the child be successful? So if the medicine is working, you know, if somebody has sort of mild diabetes, you change the way they eat. You know, you don't continue to eat lots of cookies. It's hard. It's not easy, but basically you have to gently go with whatever works.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful thought to end on, and that's a kind of a wonderful theme, I think, of your presentation, is sort of to gently go with whatever works, and really having that flexibility. And I always learn a lot from our conversations, and I know that our participants did today as well. We had over 100 participants today, and there's many more who I know will watch the recording online after. And many of our students from Framingham State were on the session today. So just want to thank you again, Dr. Stewart, so much.
You know, if I could, I'm seeing a lot of questions going through that I wish I had time to answer. I just want to say we can talk about that more in the discussion time next week, but also if you can give me a copy of that, and if we have any kind of contact information for these folks,
Yes.
I would like to write back to some of them because I think there are
Wonderful.
significant needs that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. So that's such a generous offer, and we will, as I said, and as you mentioned, we will have an online discussion, and that is in 1 week. I'm actually going to put I am going to put a link right now into the chat for folks to be able to sign up. You'll see at this link that event, as well as in a few weeks, we're going to have a book discussion of Ross Greene's book, Raising Human Beings, and I think many of the themes connect there as well, particularly what Dr. Stewart shared about parenting teens and how to navigate that particular developmental stage. But what we'll do now, I think, is officially end the session and end the recording, and people can stick around for a few more minutes and certainly chat with Dr. Stewart if you'd like for a couple more minutes, and then we'll make sure we are getting in touch over email with further information and resources. So thank you again. Thanks everyone for being here, and
Thank you.
best wishes.